Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Keys to AWS Optimization. We have an amazing show for you today, talking all about the world of FinOps, but specifically how developers and finance play nicely together with my amazing guests. But let's start with some warm-up chat. Dawn, how are you doing today?
I'm well. It's a little bit cold here where I'm at, but I'm managing.
Good, good. Yeah, Denver, it's too cold. We're talking about that. I don't need that kind of level of cold right now. I, I had people were talking about this thing where a lot of men wear like shorts in the cold and they're like really hardcore. But then someone pointed out that England just isn't that cold, and so they're not really that hardcore. It's just like not that cold. Aretha,
Yeah.
oh, sorry, go on.
I was going to say it was about two degrees below zero a couple hours ago. So hopefully we're above zero now. But yeah, pretty chilly.
Not for me. Aretha, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm from sunny California, but today it's been raining. So I guess I can complain a little bit about that. But no, yeah, excited to be on the show today. Also excited that it's Thursday, so almost the end of the week.
Love it. And you might remember Hadritha, but she looks a little different last time she was on the show. She was on last for our Halloween episode where you were Wonder Woman, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. It was a very, very fun episode. Check that back in the Twitch channel. And where is everybody watching today? Please feel free, drop it in the chat. Where are you viewing from? Maybe tell me how the weather's doing. Maybe I'm inspired to move. I want to know where everybody is hanging out these days and let us know. Okay, so before we get into it, we're going to start with our classic kind of warm-up question, which is, have you guys had a frugal week or a splurgy week? Dawn, why don't we start with you? Frugal week or splurgy week?
Man, you're catching me at an interesting time. It's been a pretty splurgy week for me. I'm in the middle of a remodel, so that's not
Oh.
not a normal state of being for me. I'm usually pretty frugal, but not this week.
Haritha, what about you?
It's definitely been a splurgy week. I think just because it's Valentine's Day tomorrow and I have a little daughter, so I'm just trying to make it special for her. So it's been fun to kind of do a little bit of a planning for her there.
Nice, nice. I'm gonna be a humble. I'm not saying it's not really humble, it's a brag. It's been a splurgy week because I actually competed. I mentioned this last week, I think, on the show that I was competing at England's Strongest Woman, and I came away and qualified for the next level. So it was a bit of a splurgy week
Ooh,
traveling for
Wow.
that. Yeah, I came top 5 in the country, so I'm able to go
wow.
represent in the UK. So, and these strong people out there, let us know in
Congratulations.
the comments. Thank you.
That's amazing.
Cloud.strive says go. Oh, someone found the emoji. If you look and you are on Twitch, you will see a little emoji of me actually lifting a giant dumbbell. So you can see that. Let's see where everyone's from. We got people from Cape Town, Atlanta. It's raining. And see raining here. So sad times about the weather, guys. Hopefully today's chat will boost you up. My name is Steph Gooch. I'm a senior optimization architect advocate at AWS, here to help you on your FinOps journeys. And like I said, today we have an awesome episode with my lovely guest talking all about how finance and engineering navigate the world of FinOps today. And these guests have backgrounds in these specific areas, and we're going to talk a little bit about what their responsibilities are, what their roles are, to hopefully educate you as a viewer so that if you're one of them, you can see from the other's point of view, or if you're working in the business, you can see how these things go together. So why don't we kick it off with our 1-minute origin story? So this is just a brief intro of what you guys do, Amazon, and why these people watching should listen to you. So Haritha, why don't you go first?
Sure. Thanks, Steph. Hi, guys. My name is Haritha Chitalia. I am a FinOps commercial architect on the optics team. I've been part of the team for, I think, a little over a year now, and it's been a very exciting journey so far. I'm super excited to be on today's episode because it sort of aligns closely with my origin story because I started off as an engineer, transitioned into product management, and now sort of in this whole FinOps world. So happy to kind of embody an engineer's perspective today. I specifically work closely with strategic ISV customers and have and sort of taken inspiration from my interactions with them, and we'll share some stories related to that through this episode today. But I think it's going to be a good episode just to kind of talk about these two different entities, engineering versus finance today.
Yeah, definitely. And Dawn, go for it. What about you?
Yep. Hey, everybody. My name is Dawn Mersek, and I am a FinOps Success Manager on the AWS Optics team as well, supporting customers within the telco vertical. I've been with AWS about 2.5 years now, and like mentioned earlier, I'm based in beautiful Denver, Colorado. What I enjoy most about the work that I do is helping customers to maximize their value in the cloud. And while a big focus of our work is on supporting customers through optimization activities and cost savings initiatives, another really big focus and equally important focus is helping to cultivate cost aware culture, and something that can be oftentimes overlooked, but it does help teams develop a shared language and understanding around FinOps that ultimately helps drive a better collaboration between the teams in pursuit of their goals over the long term. So I'm super happy to be here, and I echo Haritha's statements about working together and building collaboration. So happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation representing the finance perspective.
Perfect. And as people who have maybe seen me before, I used to work in engineering world, and so I probably relate more to Haritha's point of view about more of that. So I'm excited to learn from Dawn about how well. But to start us off, like a big advice is go and meet the other people in your organization. I'm going to go into detail about what these guys do and their perspectives, but whoever you are, go and speak to your counterparts, because developing that relationship is going to be the most important thing so that you guys can learn from each other and work better together, just having that kind of familiarity, which is awesome. So sticking with you, Dawn, I mean, you guys came to me with this episode idea, so I'd love to know kind of why you guys proposed this as a concept.
Yeah, so Haritha and I both came to AWS from backgrounds that are aligned with the personas that we're here talking about today. Me from the more finance centered background, and Haritha more from the engineering side of things. And so we both experienced firsthand that kind of disconnect or miscommunication or misunderstanding that can occur between the two roles in an organization. And over time, working with an array of different customers, we came to realize that this scenario wasn't something that was necessarily unique to each one of our individual experiences, but something we encounter quite frequently. So it does seem like it's a topic that's relevant to a lot of the folks out there in these roles in different companies. And so we just thought it was a great opportunity to highlight that, kind of come together and talk through it, and hopefully facilitate some better communication, greater understanding, and I think more intent around engagements and interactions with the other teams.
Haritha, I'd love to throw it to you to learn, who do you think should be watching this episode? Who's going to stick around? Everyone's obviously going to stick around and watch to the end, but who is the key audience here?
Yes, so please stick around and listen to this whole conversation. But I think today's discussion really is highly beneficial for all of the stakeholders who are involved in kind of initiating and practicing FinOps best practices. And this can include, people like engineers, finance analysts, procurement managers, product managers. We have executive leadership team, as well as like your executive sponsors. So if you are any one of these representatives, even a cloud architect or a person who's just practicing FinOps, right? You're a FinOps practitioner. So if you're any one of these personas, I feel like today's conversation will be highly beneficial, because just based on what Dawn and I have experienced with our interactions with our customers, sometimes, most of the time, our interactions are very one-off with one of these stakeholders. Very rarely do we get to kind of bring all of them into a room. And we're really sort of pushing for that. And I think today's conversation will help shine some light into the benefit of investing in this relationship between engineering and finance, because they kind of, they're always sort of treated as two separate entities. My experience when I was an engineer, I wasn't really working that closely with the finance person. I just assumed someone else on my team was, more cost conscious and taking care of that. And I was sort of turning a blind eye to all of that and just kind of doing heads down work on whatever that I needed to work on. But I think there's an opportunity for anybody to sort of reach out and branch out and network with your peers. And one of your peers can be finance from an engineer's perspective, right? And really, finance sort of understands budgets and cost structures, and engineers really understand technical requirements and implementation feasibility. So together, I think there's like a great opportunity to really create some realistic cost optimization practices.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And we're going to go through a bunch of the different responsibilities for these guys and how they communicate. But we're also going to touch a little bit at the end of like the points in data. So one thing I always bring up is that when I was working with like cost data and the cost and usage report, check that out if you haven't heard of it before. And I was able to look at it from like a big lens of knowing what everything meant inside of that. But if you gave that to someone in finance, like those words mean nothing to them and they want it in terms of cost center or team. And so understanding that nuance is very true. Someone's put in the chat, once an engineer, always an engineer. You can't unfriend being an engineer. True that. And as a reminder, guys, you can ask us questions. That is the point of being on us live. So feel free to drop any questions, comments in the chat, and we'll make sure to try our best to answer those. Or if you are watching this on demand and you want to ask a question, email us at costoptimization@amazon.com and we'll make sure to get back. So let's start off with, who do you want to go for? Let's go for finance first. So let's see. For finance, let's start at the beginning. Okay, Dawn, what is a finance person's role?
Yeah, so a finance is a pretty broad term, right? And it can include a lot of different roles depending on the size and structure of your organization, but typically all rolling up through the CFO. For this discussion, I will primarily be speaking from the perspective of someone who's like a traditional corporate finance practitioner. So think of someone, someone sitting in an FP&A or financial planning and analysis team who's responsible for financial reporting, planning, strategy, budget forecasting, cost monitoring, cost control, cost visibility. These finance roles are typically more involved and engaged with the business, working directly, with managers or with the individual contributors in the team to set budgets and forecasts and report on actual results in line with those expectations. But they're also often a conduit to accounting, who not always, but is typically less involved in the day-to-day operations of the field, but is equally invested in the outcome and the financial results.
Okay. And Haritha, does that, I think it is like what I would expect someone to say, but from your point of view, is that exactly what you thought a finance person does?
No, that's a great question because I kind of always mixed accounting and finance together. I never saw them as like two separate entities. So it's really enlightening to see, like the roles and responsibilities that kind of fall on a finance analyst or a persona that sort of embodies that role. I always just thought, they were working on budgets. I wasn't really aware that they were monitoring costs and things like that as well. So it's really good to get that insight.
Dawn, in terms of a finance kind of persona, what's like a day-to-day workload for them?
Yeah, that can be kind of a mixed bag, but usually monitoring spend, tracking anomalies, validating spend against your budget and forecast again, and then establishing mechanisms to systematically track some of those things and to make sure that those mechanisms are working properly. So another piece would be financial modeling and scenario analysis. A lot of times, the speed of business is very, very fast. So being able to demonstrate how outcomes or results evolved under changing circumstances and as inputs change is super important to help leaders make informed decisions. Another big responsibility of a finance org is being the consolidator of data and information. So aggregating spend across all of the business units to be able to provide, a big picture view of what's going on. And so, then go ahead.
No, keep going.
I was just going to say, I think one more big thing alongside that is providing commentary or telling the story around the numbers, because a lot of times the numbers themselves may not accurately depict, what's going on in the business. For example, if a team is overrunning their budget, let's say in a given period, that may be a signal that something is, quote unquote wrong, but it may also be a signal that they've delivered a product, ahead of schedule faster than they had anticipated. So their spend was up in a given period, but they're also probably then, generating revenue against that faster than was anticipated as well. So really being able to provide the color and the commentary around the story to make the numbers meaningful is a big part of the responsibility.
Yeah, I never really thought about that. And someone's even asked in the chat, does AWS have tools in place that can monitor and alert on deviation on costs which are abnormal? Haritha, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely do have some tooling that helps us sort of monitor this. You can set alerts. You can use Cost Explorer just to easily visualize your costs on a day-to-day or a month-to-month basis, but definitely some alerting in place. I think through maybe Steph, do you off the top of your head? It's not coming off the top of my head, but which
Yeah,
specific
cost
tool?
anomaly detection. Yeah.
Cost anomaly detection. I was like, it always kind of like, yeah, at the
There's
tip of my tongue.
You can
No
also set budgets, right, with parameters that you set and set alerting around those things too to let you know if something's getting out of a line from that perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll just pause there for a second for people who don't know the difference between the two, because I think sometimes they get really confusing. So when you set a budget, think of it as like a line in the sand. If anything comes close to that budget, an alert will go off and you're like, hey, you're getting close to the amount of money you have. Versus anomaly detection is what it's looking for is variance. So something like if there's a 40% difference in, and 40% is the one on the default setting for anomaly detection. If there's a 40% difference in your spend of a certain type of resource in an account or whatever parameter you set, it will let you know. So for example, if your EC2 kind of, not sorry, what you were saying, Doyle, if your EC2 is like gradually growing, it's not going to let you know because maybe you just are using more resources gradually. However, in Dawn's example of a new workload got deployed earlier and there's suddenly like a massive spike in resources that you weren't using, or even a big spike in something like EC2, you'll get alerted. And so probably Dawn would get that alert and then have to be like, oh, okay, that's from that account. This is what was predicted to happen, but they've just done it early. It's no alarm bells versus something that goes off and you're like, hang on a second, we're not even going to be using that resource. Like, what's that account? That account should be, the amount of time someone says that account should be deprecated. And I'm like, yeah, I've heard that before. So yeah, take some time to figure out those. But anomaly detection by default is enabled when you enable AWS Amazon Cost Explorer. So once that's turned on, you have an anomaly that's set up and it will go to the email of your billing account. So be aware if you've set it up to like somebody's email that doesn't work there or a random email in the company, it will go there. So try and use something like a distribution list at that kind of center point. But I've got another question for you, Dawn, which was how much of your role was working backwards, kind of looking at variance analysis versus future looking for business cases?
I would say it's probably a mixed bag, 50-50, right? It's important to understand what happened because that is actually very influential into what could happen. So I would say it's about a 50-50 trying to, untangle what happened in the past versus predicting what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I also have
Yeah.
a quick question
Yeah.
for Dawn. Because Dawn, you mentioned that, in addition to sort of forecasting and checking budgets and looking at cost anomalies, always
It's hard to
struggling with
say.
that word. Yeah.
It's hard to say. I tried to say
Yeah.
analysis and I couldn't.
But you also mentioned that you are also the great consolidator of all the data, right? To kind of build that big picture. So who do you typically work with? Like, who are some of like your peers that help you kind of pull that together? Because I'm assuming maybe there's some involvement with some data engineers and stakeholders that can help you with that. But would love to understand how you're able to kind of pull that together.
Yeah, absolutely. Some data engineering teams, I've worked in organizations where there were tooling teams whose responsibility was for you to, bring them a use case or business case of how you needed to see data, and they could put it out in a visual format, Tableau or Power BI or something like that. But yeah, working with those teams to put together a consolidated view that's usually the consumer of that is going to be your executive leadership, like your C-suite, so they can get, quick insight and visibility into what's going on.
Yeah, that's great to know because I think it's one avenue into sort of making that networking connection to someone on the engineering side as well. So I just thought it was like a really cool fact about the finance team.
Yeah. Drilling into what you just said about rolling up some of this data into like the C-suite level, any kind of, I mean, we've done episodes before, and the team has written, shout out to Haley, writing a blog, and Gabby did a blog post and episode on Twitch about speaking with kind of execs and getting in buy-in. But from a finance point of view, is there any kind of nuances that you like to kind of have when you share that data? Like any tips for people who are like trying to present cloud stuff specifically to senior leadership?
Back to the color and the commentary around it and providing the story, that's where really the value add is, right? Because the numbers are the numbers and aren't necessarily indicative of what's going on. So really partnering with the business and going into those conversations more I think well versed in the actual story than maybe even the numbers themselves.
Okay, good to add that kind of color and context. I like the description of it. Okay, so 2 more questions before we jump into this flip side on the dev point of view. So what are your goals in finance? Because you're not the person spending that money, this is someone else's, so you can't be like, oh yeah, I'm just going to cut the costs. So what is kind of some high level goals that are just this is also a tip for, we talk about this cross-working thing. Knowing your peers' goals and what they're trying to achieve is so helpful in building a relationship, because then you can see how you can help each other achieve your goals. So take this as an example from Dawn, but also ask your finance person, like, what are they trying to achieve?
Yeah, so setting guardrails, right? Because within the engineering organization, people within any organization actually can get very narrowly focused on what it is they're trying to achieve and what resources are required, financial resources are required to accomplish that, but can sometimes lose sight of extrapolating that across an organization. And a budget has to exist. There has to be some limits, some guardrails and parameters put around that. So that's something that's very, important to the finance folks, is setting up those guardrails and trying to keep things in those bounds. Just the financial accuracy and predictability in the cloud, that can be a little bit challenging, but to the extent that you can, sharpen your pencil and hone in on and get really good at forecasting, that's something that's, really, really important. And then ensuring data integrity, right? So the decisions that are being made on, the financial reporting are only good to the extent that the underlying data itself is good and consistent and accurate. So that's, something really important and something that we care a lot about and spend a lot of time taking a look at.
Yeah, that's something I'm terrible at. I'm just going to say it. I'm not good at checking the data, right? Okay, last question before we move on to engineering side. Who are your stakeholders?
Yeah, so again, executive leadership a lot of times. So your CEO, your CFO, the other C-suite executives that rely on financial reporting to make decisions. To varying degrees, the board of directors as well, because they also review financial reports to ensure financial stability, and they're also usually involved in large financial decisions. Department and business unit leadership, right? Those are the folks that we work very closely with in establishing budgets and forecasts and performance metrics. And then individual contributors as well. So these can be like the folks on the engineering team, the ones that are, the builders, the ones that are deploying the resources in the cloud and managing the workloads. That relationship and that stakeholder relationship is also very, very important.
One more question for you, Dawn, and then we'll move on. What resources did you find helpful when starting out in this space, in terms of the FinOps space, I'm assuming, for you?
Yeah, so the keys to AWS optimization, of course.
She's also, just saying that.
Also, the FinOps Foundation is a good resource for someone who's used to a more traditional finance space, as the FinOps discipline or knowledge area starts to gain traction. I think that's definitely a good resource to take a look at, to start to familiarize yourself with the environment.
So let's take it back and go to the developer role. So Haritha, like you said at the start, you've been doing this kind of role in the past, and now you've come in to the AWS world. So what is the dev role? Give us a brief summary.
Yeah, I think very similar to what Don had said about the finance role, the dev role can be pretty broad. It is a very broad term, and within the engineering organization, there can be many different people that are sort of coming together to help build and deploy all of these workloads and applications. So you can think of software engineers, DevOps engineers, cloud architects, SREs, infrastructure engineers, data scientists, data engineers. So it's just there's a plethora of people that are involved in this space, and they all sort of roll up either to a CTO or the VP of engineering. But for today's conversation, I really want to mostly focus on the software slash DevOps engineering folks, because they, in my opinion, have a lot of responsibility when it comes to building and deploying workloads and applications in the cloud. So they understand um, what type of resources need to be consumed or required to build these applications, and then they end up actually designing and architecting them, probably in close collaboration with other engineers. But they have like that full picture, which I think is really beneficial to sort of identify and drive like best FinOps practices, because they can sort of fill in the gaps that I guess Don is also looking for when it comes to that narrative of like when there's a spike in costs, um, what could have happened, or why would it happen that way, and things like that.
Yeah, awesome. So what are your like day-to-day responsibilities? So again, we're coming from, imagine someone who doesn't, because like we just said as well, it's very handy that there's a lot of different people from different audience backgrounds. So lay out what would be like a day-to-day responsibilities they'd be taking care of.
Yeah, I think generally for every engineer, the top priority or responsibility is just to like continuously deliver highly valuable business applications that are extremely reliable and secure, specifically in this conversation in the cloud, while also maintaining business as usual, right? So making sure that the existing applications are working and are meeting the customer demands as well. So the way I look at it when I think about responsibilities for an engineer, I think it sort of falls into three different areas. You have like the initial phase of architecting or designing an application, and then they're sort of in the development phase of building an application, and then they sort of transition into maintaining an application. So they can be wearing that hat, throughout the day. They can be switching those hats throughout the day as well, and making sure that it's sort of efficient. So they're listing out the types of resources they need within the cloud. And then they also probably have some insight into cost projections, right? So basically understanding how much it would cost to deploy a workload like this or an application like this within the cloud, because they're sort of listing out all the required resources, either front end, back end, whatever that may look like. And also during this time, they're probably assessing a lot of trade-offs. So it's like, how would we, are there any trade-offs when it comes to disaster recovery versus performance? Or are there, this is the time where they may be in that engineering headspace, but they're also thinking about how many idle resources would I want to have in the background for something like disaster recovery? And then also looking at how do we trade off performance versus cost? So weighing in on, do I need a instance type that's highly compute efficient or memory efficient? So kind of thinking through all of those types of factors. And then after they when they're in that architecture phase, that's sort of all the things that they're thinking through. But then when it comes to building, obviously developing and testing their workloads in the cloud, specifically in the test environment or dev environment initially, using some templatized solutions like infrastructure as a code, some of the SDKs that are offered within AWS, as well as, using IDEs to write their code and making sure that it's written in an optimal way. I think it's also a very collaborative time for the engineering team when they're in the build phase, because they're working with their peers, reviewing each other's code, deploying it, merging it, sort of going through that entire life cycle of application development and then deploying it into the cloud. And then when it comes to maintaining the application, which is the last piece, they're monitoring the performance and the health of the application using tools like CloudTrail or CloudWatch, setting alerts when there's performance that's peaked, or it's not meeting the demands that the workload may have. Having those alerts in place to sort of monitor that, and then kind of making decisions to either right size resources, do better workload management, and sort of do all of the things that you need to do to kind of keep the lights on. But as you can see, just based off of my response, there's a lot on the engineer's plate. Yeah. So sometimes cost can be not a top priority for them because there's just a lot that's going on.
Yeah. And
quick question for you, Rita. Oh, quick question
for you,
Rita. It seems like, and this was super enlightening for me too, to understand kind of the engineering perspective in more detail, but a place of the development cycle that seems like it could be a good place for finance and engineering to partner more closely is in that architecture phase where you're actually planning out what resources and how many and what's going to be needed to support that. I think it would be really great for finance to be more engaged in that part of the planning process. And I think it will alleviate, as you said, there's a lot on the engineer's plate. I think it'll alleviate some of maybe the follow-up or the questions that come later, is if finance has visibility to that sort of stuff earlier on.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great point, Don, because having that initial insight and opening that line of communication ahead of time or in a more proactive manner between the two stakeholders can really sort of help us avoid any type of big surprises in the future. I think we can also apply that even with maintaining applications, right? So if there's any reason why we're duplicating workloads or migrating workloads, notifying our stakeholders like finance about it so that you're aware of it ahead of time can really alleviate some of those miscommunications that could happen between the two teams.
Awesome. So many things. There's like I said, like a lot of different elements to an engineer's day. And I think it's kind of interesting but the scope is sometimes different. So even though an engineer is dealing with like so many different elements to it, it's of one project versus someone in finance probably seeing the overall business. So there is lots of elements, but it's kind of like the scale of that, and that's something to consider because often there's one engineer for one thing, but one finance for a whole company, a whole department, and so that scope really can vary. What tools for FinOps are key for engineers, Harita?
Great question. I think definitely cost visibility to an extent is a challenge for a lot of the engineers, and there are several tools within AWS that can help with that. We have Cost Explorer and we have our Cloud Intelligence dashboards as well that are great to use to kind of just visualize and see what cost can look like. And there's also a lot of different tools that sort of help you with optimization. So something like Compute Optimizer or Trusted Advisor are great tools that kind of automate and give you insights into how you should be right-sizing your applications or resources, or if there's any idle resources that you need to go in and either delete or sunset. So just having access to a lot of these kinds of tools can really help for engineers to make some really good FinOps decisions because it's going to pinpoint you to the exact resource. It also, to an extent, if you have tagging in place, can help you identify the owner of that resource. So there's just a lot of information that's available. And as engineers, we have the power to then actually take action on these.
Maybe from Dawn, go back to your finance point of view. On-prem, this is an old school question, is very different to cloud, but do you want to just kind of outline that and why sometimes that's where like finance kind of maybe get halted with this difference with cloud spend?
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like one of the major contributing factors in the kind of friction or disconnect in the engagement that we've been touching on comes as a result of the transition from an on-prem data center environment to the cloud. In an on-prem environment, resource needs are typically planned years in advance, right? So you're typically working with long-term vendor contracts. There's usually a lot of engagement between the finance teams and the engineering teams on the front end of that planning process. But then that doesn't necessarily require an ongoing, consistent, communication because the visibility for finance is already there. They know it's going to be spent. The spend is fairly fixed and predictable. And they have everything they need. So when you transition over to the pay-as-you-go model in the cloud, costs can scale or change, go up or down fairly quickly and unexpectedly. So the relationship has to evolve. It has to become more dynamic and continuous, because finance does need more of that continuous engagement, real-time engagement and feedback.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to the data that you look at, what is your key sources that you're getting it from in terms of the Amazon cloud spend?
I think Cost Explorer has been mentioned. It's a great tool for finance visibility. There's a pretty low barrier to entry in terms of being able to get in there and quickly get insights, understand spend drivers, and navigate the tooling. And as we mentioned, that's where you can, set up some of these alerting mechanisms to alert you to spend that kind of goes outside the parameters you've set. The billing console is also a convenient, easy way to kind of get an insight into spend. Although I would say this is probably more of a supplementary tool, not something you would necessarily, not necessarily be your first go-to. And then, of course, the Cur. The Cur is a great resource for visibility and digging in for some more deeper analysis. And whether your organization is ingesting the Cur directly, so you can leverage it, through internal tooling, or whether you're querying directly, there's a wealth of information available there. So that's a great resource. And then probably the last one I would say are the CIDs, the Cloud Intelligence Dashboard. They're great for giving cost visibility features right out of the box, but it's also customizable depending on your org's needs. And it's also a great tool to leverage if you're looking at spend across organizations.
Perfect. Yeah, those cloud intelligence dashboards. I feel like we should have a bell every time we mention it, because it's like per episode. And last question on this, very simple. How often do finance kind of people look at this cost data, would you say? Oh, I've lost her.
Nope.
Don't worry, we'll go. We'll shoot over to Haritha and let you kind of jump on this visibility trend. So Haritha, what kind of data do you look at in terms? So we've got Cost Explorer, those ones, but anything specific?
Yeah, I think outside of looking sort of the tools that Don has already mentioned with visibility, when it comes for an engineer, I think tools like CloudWatch and CloudTrail are great tools to help monitor the performance and health of an application. It's a great way to sort of track and make sure that existing applications are working as expected. Obviously, working with tools like CloudFormation or Terraform templates is another piece of the puzzle, which is to help us automate the process of building workloads and deploying workloads into the cloud quickly. Collaboration is a huge piece, right, with building new workloads and applications. So using tools like Code Build, Code Deploy, Code Pipeline, all great AWS services that you can use to kind of automate that process and speed up the process of your development lifecycle. But I think that sort of gives you just an overview of all the things that maybe a developer or an engineer could be using on a day-to-day basis to look at data and to kind of expedite their building process. But I think eventually it would also be great if engineers are coming and saying, oh, I'm looking at cost data, maybe not at a daily level, but at least at a monthly or during review cycles or something like that. So going into Cost Explorer and having that visibility into costs as well for their applications, if they're a workload owner, is a great start. And there could be internal tools right within your organization that are already built out that you already have access to, that are consolidating a lot of this data. So data coming from Cur can be fed into an internal tool that you may have access to as well, that you can then have access to see cost data. So lots of different options there.
Yeah, and I just want to shout out the billing views that we released at reInvent. That's the link in the chat, but if you search for Cost Explorer billing views, these are great if you are an engineer who has not had access to any data, and then you have 3 accounts, maybe dev, test, and prod of an application, but you have to see your cost, you have to log into each of them. You can now set up billing views to group those together and be able to see it all at once. Like, we were heavily involved in this release. So happy that it's kind of come through. So please check that out. On to our very last bit. We've just got 10 minutes to finish up here. So I would love to chat through kind of next steps for finance and engineering or developers. So after watching this episode in general, like what should start with finance. What should finance people do next to work well with their engineering teams, Dawn?
And we've said it several times during our conversation, but bringing it full circle, I think one of the most important things that the finance people can do to support engineering and devs is the relationship, investing in the relationship piece. So being proactive, asking questions, putting forth the effort to understand their process, their development cycles, their objectives, what cadences, what areas where might they be heads down on something, so it's not the best time, to schedule that budget meeting. Those sorts of things goes a long way and pays dividends over the long term in helping bridge communication and reducing some of that resistance that you often find. It's an invaluable asset to kind of reframe that vision that we have of the other person and the other team.
100%. And someone's even put so true, communication is key with dealing with these other people. Anything else?
One more thing I'd add is I think it's important to seek input from your engineering teams when you're putting together like your financial reporting, your templates, your structure, since you're likely going to need their participation again and adding that color around the numbers. You need to make sure that how you're structuring things or putting things together from a reporting perspective makes sense to them. So it's important to get their buy-in and that sort of things. And I think that kind of aligns with the goal we talked about earlier in establishing like a common or shared understanding or language around FinOps.
Awesome. All right, Haritha, similar question for you. What are the next steps for someone from a developer engineering point of view?
Yeah, I think it kind of echoes pretty closely to what Don had to say of like having communication in place or just like being proactive about having communication in place. But I think the first step an engineer can take is just to ask questions, be curious, outside of all the things that they already do, ask questions about, well, how does this impact our budget or our total revenue? Overall, I do think that both teams can benefit from having like goal alignment as well, right? So right now, my important KPIs, the KPIs that I'm tracking from an engineer's perspective, are very different from the KPIs that Don may care about. So if you want to sort of build that relationship and that bond as a single entity, then we need to have shared goals. So, alignment on maybe KPIs like cloud cost as percentage of revenue or allocated cloud spend, or even like resource utilization, right? That's like something that an engineer can understand pretty quickly. So if you've provisioned X amount of resources and you see that only 80% of them are being used, having that metric to track and sort of reporting on those metrics together can kind of bring both of the groups together. So I know engineers are always usually heads down doing a lot of like programming in front of their computers. So it's great to kind of step away from that world and kind of to speak to someone else who does something very different from you. But at the end of the day, you guys are both working towards the same goal of delivering business value while being cost conscious. So I think that common language and common alignment on goals can really help push this relationship forward. And engineers can really benefit from having these conversations with finance because then they have a new challenge right ahead of them. Because I think every engineer loves to be challenged when it comes to optimization. So now we can think about cost optimization as a challenge to take on and sort of pursue that as well. So yeah.
One more question I want to ask Dawn. Dawn's smashing it. You're getting all the hard questions because we're not used to having a finance point of view. So I feel like everyone will ask you questions. Who is creating the journal entry for Cloud Cost Finance, or is something accounting does? And how is accounting involved? We kind of touched on the start. Haritha and I were both like, oh yeah, accounting's different. Quick, like 1 minute summary on where that sits would be great.
So again, that's going to depend on your organization. My experience of that is typically accounting is the one that's booking that journal entry, but finance is usually the one that's helping formulate what the actual dollar amount of that is. So it's close collaboration between finance and accounting, and close collaboration between finance and the business to get things recorded properly.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Okay. All right. Let's get, and if you haven't seen this before, we have our secret Richard. So Richard is one of our teammates, never to come on camera, but he listens to the show and creates us a fun little summary that I have to read without seeing it. Finance versus developer summary. Number 1, dev spend, finance analyze and report on dev spend. It's just a circle. That's all it is. Finance enables decisions making through data. It's not accounting. Me and Harita, we've both learned this today. Devs build, innovate, and maintain. Very true. Important in the cloud environment that roles collaborate. Oh, I love this. We just want to work together, which is great. Okay, thank you so much, guys. Any last points you want to say before we finish up?
I just want to say, thanks for having us on. Like you said, it's important to get the finance perspective every now and then. So I appreciate being the one tap to come in today and talk to you guys about it. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, for sure. And if you guys can find us on LinkedIn, I'm not saying spams or with questions, but you'll be able to see anything that she posts and shares some information about. Harita, any last points from you?
No, I think I loved today's conversation. I hope that it was helpful for everybody who attended and motivated them to go and build some relationships. So thanks for having us.